When the priest asked if anyone had cause to object, I expected silence. Instead, one voice from the back of the church didn't just stop my wedding, it exposed a family secret, so twisted it made my own blood run cold. The scent of lilies and old wood filled the air, a combination I'd forever associate with the single most perfect moment of my life. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was a tremor of pure, unadulterated joy, the kind that vibrates right up from your soul. I stood at the altar, my back ramrod straight in a tuxedo that felt more like a suit of armor for a king than something a 21-year-old kid from the suburbs should be wearing. But today, I felt like a king. Because in a few moments, Chloe would be my queen. And then I saw her. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church swung open, and a slice of brilliant afternoon sun backlit her silhouette. Chloe. She was everything I wasn't. Graceful, ethereal, kind to a fault. My life before her had been a series of messy, impulsive decisions, a highlight reel of bad judgment and broken hearts. I was chaos, and she was the calm, steady hand that had finally put all my jagged pieces together. She started her walk down the aisle on her father's arm, a radiant smile on her face that was meant only for me. The organ swelled, a triumphant, beautiful sound that seemed to lift the very roof off the church. My breath caught in my throat. I could see the tiny, happy tears welling in her eyes, and I felt my own start to prickle. This was it. This was the first day of the rest of my life. Our friends and family packed the pews, a sea of smiling, tear-streaked faces. My parents were in the front row, my mom clutching a fistful of tissues, my dad giving me a proud, watery-eyed nod. Across the aisle, Chloe's parents looked like they'd just won the lottery. I suppose, in a way, we all had. We were young, sure. 21 is practically an infant in the grand scheme of things. But we just knew. When you find the person who makes the world stop spinning, you don't wait. You lock it down. You build a fortress around that feeling and you guard it with your life. Chloe reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in mine. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. "Take care of my girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, unable to speak, and squeezed her hand. I looked into her eyes, those incredible pools of blue that held all the promises of our future, and the rest of the world just melted away. There was no one else in that church, just us. The priest, Father Michael, a kind old man who had known Chloe since she was a baby, began the ceremony. His voice was a gentle, calming drone, reciting words that had been spoken for centuries. I was barely listening. I was lost in Chloe's face, memorizing the way a stray piece of hair curled beside her ear, the gentle curve of her smile. We exchanged our vows, my voice cracking on the word always, her voice clear and true. We slid the simple gold bands onto each other's fingers. They felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the significance of the promises we'd just made. I felt a wave of dizziness, not from anxiety, but from the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of my love for this woman. Finally, we reached the end, the crescendo, the part I'd seen in 100 movies. Father Michael beamed at us, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "And so," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space, "as they have consented together in holy wedlock and have witnessed the same before God and this company, and thereto have given and pledged their troth, each to the other." He paused, taking a breath and looking out over the congregation. It was the traditional, dramatic beat before the finale, the last hurdle. He cleared his throat. If anyone can show just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever, hold their peace. The words hung in the air, a formality, an ancient piece of legalese that nobody ever paid attention to. A deep, profound silence fell over the church. It was the kind of quiet that feels sacred. the silence of 100 people holding their breath in unison, waiting for the final pronouncement. I gave Chloe's hand a little squeeze, a silent, "We're almost there," and shared a small secret smile with her. This was just a formality. In 5 seconds, we'd be husband and wife. 4, 3, 2, scrap. The sound was jarring, a harsh screech of wood against stone that sliced through the holy silence. It came from the back, maybe halfway down the aisle on my side. A collective ripple went through the crowd as heads began to turn. I felt a knot of confusion tighten in my stomach. Was someone ill? Did someone drop something? My eyes followed the gaze of the other guests. A woman was standing. The light from the stained glass windows painted her in fractured colors of blue and red. She was just a silhouette at first against the brighter light of the doorway behind her. I squinted, my heart starting a slow, heavy drum beat against my ribs. Who was it? An aunt I didn't recognize? A friend of Chloe's parents? Chloe's grip on my hand suddenly became vice-like. Her knuckles were white. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of utter confusion and dawning horror. I looked from her face back to the standing figure, and then she took a single step forward, out of the shadows of the pew and into the main aisle. The world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. The lilies suddenly smelled cloying and rotten. It was Maya, my ex-girlfriend, the one I hadn't seen or spoken to in 8 months, the one whose number I'd blocked, whose memory I had scrubbed from my life with all the desperate energy I could muster. She looked different. Her hair was a mess, her face was pale and drawn, and she was wearing a simple dark dress that did nothing to hide the impossible truth. Her hand was resting on her stomach, a stomach that was swollen, round, and unmistakably, undeniably pregnant. A collective gasp rippled through the pews, a sound like the tide being sucked out to sea, leaving a dead, echoing silence in its wake. My brain refused to process the image. Maya, pregnant, here. It was a scene from a soap opera, a cheap theatrical stunt. It couldn't be real. But the swell of her stomach under that thin black dress was undeniably real. The desperate, defiant look in her eyes was real. My blood ran cold, turning to slush in my veins. My own hand, still holding Chloe's, felt numb and foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "What is she doing here?" Chloe whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were locked on Maya, her face a pale mask of horror. Father Michael, bless his heart, looked utterly lost. He adjusted his glasses, peering down the aisle as if he couldn't quite believe his own eyes. "My dear lady," he started, his voice trembling slightly, "if you would please be seated. This is hardly the time or the place." But Maya didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on me, a laser beam of accusation and pain that pinned me to the altar. "I'm sorry, Father," she said, and her voice, though quiet, carried with unnerving clarity through the silent church. "But it is the time, and it is the place." The whispers started then, quiet at first, then growing in volume like the hiss of 1,000 snakes. I could feel the eyes of every single person in that church boring into me. My mom had her hand clamped over her mouth, her face ashen. My dad looked like he wanted to murder someone. Across the aisle, Chloe's father had taken a half-step forward, his big hands clenched into fists, his face a thundercloud of pure rage. He looked from Maya to me, and then to his daughter, and the protective fury in his eyes made me want to shrink into nothing. My mind was a hurricane of denial. "It's not mine. It can't be mine." We broke up. It's been 8 months. I did the math, a frantic, desperate calculation. 8 months. It was possible. No, it wasn't. We were careful, weren't we? The breakup hadn't been a clean break. It had been a slow, agonizing tear, a series of fights and tearful reconciliations that stretched over weeks. My memory snagged on one night in particular. The final blowout fight. The one where I'd told her I'd met someone else, Chloe. Maya had been devastated. I'd left, packed a bag, and moved out. But a week later, drunk and lonely and stupid, I'd gone back to her apartment to get the rest of my stuff. We'd argued again, but the anger had melted into grief, and the grief had morphed into a desperate, misguided attempt to find comfort in the familiar. One last time. A mistake. A colossal, life-altering mistake that I had buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. "Leo," Maya said, her voice cracking now, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. "Don't do this. You can't just pretend I don't exist, that we don't exist." The we she was referring to was horribly, terrifyingly clear. She meant her and the baby. Our baby. The thought sent a jolt of pure panic through me, so intense it almost buckled my knees. My best man, Mark, put a steadying hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. Then, the worst thing happened. Worse than the gasps, worse than the whispers, worse than the burning stare of Chloe's father. Chloe let go of my hand. The absence of her touch was like a physical blow. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, empty space between us that felt a mile wide. I finally tore my eyes away from Maya and looked at my bride, my almost wife. Her face was completely devoid of color, her blue eyes wide with a pain so profound it stole my breath. The happy tears from moments before were gone, replaced by the glassy sheen of shock and betrayal. She wasn't looking at Maya anymore. She was looking at me, searching my face for an answer, for some sign that this was all a horrible lie. "Leo," she said, her name a barely audible puff of air. The entire church, the entire world seemed to lean in to hear her next words. "Look at me." I forced my head to turn fully to meet her gaze. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Seeing her face, the love and trust from 60 seconds ago shattered into a million pieces, was like staring into the sun. "Tell me she's lying," Chloe whispered, her voice pleading. "Leo, please, just tell me she's lying." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My tongue felt thick, a useless lump of lead. What could I say? Could I lie to her, here in front of God and everyone we loved? Could I deny it? The memory of that night with Maya flashed behind my eyes, vivid and sickening. The smell of her perfume, the taste of whiskey, the hollow feeling of regret in my stomach the next morning. I didn't know for sure if the baby was mine, but I knew it could be. And in that moment, that terrible, damning possibility was written all over my face. My silence was a confession. It was a betrayal louder than any word I could have spoken. And Chloe heard it. I watched the last flicker of hope die in her eyes. I saw her beautiful face, the face I wanted to wake up to for the rest of my life, crumble into a mask of pure, absolute devastation. She took a single stumbling step back, away from me, as if I were something diseased. The magnificent white bouquet of lilies and roses slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the cold stone floor with a soft, final thud. The thud of the bouquet was like a starter pistol firing in the dead, quiet church. Everything erupted into chaos. Chloe's father, a man I'd only ever known to be gentle and jovial, lunged forward with a guttural roar. "You son of a bitch!" he bellowed, his face purple with rage. My dad and my best man, Mark, both reacted instantly, grabbing him by the arms and holding him back as he struggled. A bull trying to gore the man who had just broken his daughter. Chloe didn't even flinch. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes fixed on the scattered white petals on the floor, as if they held the answers to the universe. Her mother rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her, murmuring frantic, comforting words that Chloe didn't seem to hear. In the pews, the whispers had become a roar of hushed, frantic conversation. Phones were coming out. I could see the glint of screens, people no doubt capturing this career-ending, life-destroying moment for posterity. My gaze flickered back to Maya. She was crying freely now, her shoulders shaking, one hand still protectively cradling her stomach. She hadn't wanted this. I knew her. She wasn't malicious. She was just desperate. And I had made her this way. I had ghosted her, blocked her, erased her from my life so completely that this public execution was her only option left. The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. "Everyone, please, calm!" Father Michael's voice was reedy and thin against the tide of anger and shock. He looked utterly helpless, a shepherd whose flock had just been set upon by wolves. But no one was listening to him. Chloe's father was still struggling against my dad's grip. "I'll kill him! I swear to God, I'll kill him!" he was shouting, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. And then Chloe moved. She lifted her head, her expression no longer one of shock, but of a chilling, profound emptiness. She looked past me, past her parents, past the chaos, her eyes locking once again onto Maya. She took a step, then another, moving not away from the altar, but towards the center of the aisle. The noise began to die down as everyone watched her, this porcelain doll that had just been shattered. She stopped about 10 feet from Maya. They stood there for a long, silent moment, the bride and the other woman, the two poles of my catastrophic failure as a human being. The air crackled with a tension so thick you could taste it. "When?" Chloe asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was scarier than if she had been screaming. Maya flinched, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. I didn't know how else to tell him," she stammered, her voice thick with sobs. "He wouldn't answer my calls, my emails. I came to his house. His mom told me he was getting married." "I didn't ask you why," Chloe said, her voice dropping even lower, colder. "I asked you when. When is it due?" The question hung in the air. This was the trial. This was the moment of judgment. The timeline would either condemn me or offer a sliver of hope. I found myself holding my breath, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. "Please be 9 months. Please be a year. Please be anything but 7 or 8 months from now." Maya swallowed hard, her hand trembling as she kept it on her belly. "The end of October," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The end of October." My mind raced, the calendar pages flipping violently. We were in late August. September, October, 2 months. That meant she was about 7 months pregnant, which meant the baby was conceived in January, the exact time of our final, messy, drunken mistake of a night together. It was a direct hit, a kill shot. There was no room for doubt, no shred of plausible deniability left to cling to. A sound escaped Chloe's lips. It wasn't a cry or a sob. It was a dry, hollow laugh, utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of a heartbreaking. "January," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "Of course. We had just started dating. You told me it was over. You swore to me it was completely over." She finally looked at me, and the emptiness in her eyes was now filled with a white-hot, blazing fire of pure hatred. It was a look that stripped me bare, that saw every lie I'd ever told, every corner I'd ever cut, every selfish impulse I'd ever followed. "I'm so sorry, Chloe," I managed to choke out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I can explain." "Explain?" she repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "Explain what? How you were sleeping with her while you were telling me you loved me? How you proposed to me, knowing she was carrying your child? Or how you let me walk down this aisle, stand here, and make a fool of myself in front of everyone I have ever known?" She took a shaky breath, her whole body trembling with rage. "There is nothing to explain, Leo. You are a liar and a coward." She turned her back on me then, a gesture of finality so absolute it felt like she had slammed a door in my face and bolted it from the other side. She walked over to her father, who had finally stopped struggling and was now just watching his daughter with an expression of complete anguish. She put a hand on his arm. "Dad," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its strength. "It's okay. Let's go." She didn't look back. Not once. She and her parents, a tight, protective unit, began to walk down the aisle, away from the altar, away from me. The guests in the pews parted for them like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of pity and disgust. As she passed Maya, she paused for a fraction of a second. She didn't say a word, didn't even really look at her, but in that brief moment, an entire universe of female pain and solidarity seemed to pass between them. Then she was gone, her white dress a ghostly apparition disappearing through the heavy oak doors, leaving me alone in the wreckage. The church slowly began to empty out, a quiet, shamed exodus. My family huddled together in the front pew, unsure of what to do, what to say. I just stood there, frozen at the altar, the gold ring on my finger feeling like a brand. I had lost everything. My future, my love, my honor, all of it, gone in the space of 5 minutes. And then I felt a timid touch on my arm. I turned. It was Maya. Her face was tear-streaked and blotchy, but her eyes were clear. "Leo," she said softly, There's something else you need to know." The world had narrowed to the space between me and Maya, the emptying church, the murmurs of my shell-shocked family, the lingering scent of Chloe's lilies. It all faded into a dull, gray background hum. All I could see was Maya's face, etched with a new kind of fear that was different from the desperation I'd seen before. It was a deeper, more complicated terror. "What?" I asked, my voice a raw croak. "What else could there possibly be, Maya?" The question dripped with a bitterness that surprised even me. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to blame her for the public detonation of my life. But looking at her, small and trembling and pregnant with what was almost certainly my child, the anger just dissolved into a thick, heavy sludge of self-loathing. This was my fault. All of it. "Not here," she whispered, glancing nervously towards my parents, who were now staring at us with matching expressions of dread. My mom looked like she was about to faint. "Can we go somewhere? Please, we need to talk. Properly." Mark, my best man and oldest friend, materialized at my side. He put a firm hand on my back, a silent, grounding pressure. "Dude, maybe that's not a good idea right now," he murmured, his eyes darting between me and Maya. He was in protective mode, but I just shook my head. Running away wasn't an option anymore. The bomb had already gone off. Now I had to walk through the radioactive fallout. "The rectory office," I heard Father Michael say. He had appeared beside us, his face pale and deeply wrinkled with worry. "It's private. No one will disturb you." He looked at me with a profound sadness, a shepherd watching his most disappointing lamb. "Leo, my boy, I'm so very sorry." I couldn't even meet his eyes. I just gave a numb nod. Mark helped me guide Maya towards a small dark wood door beside the altar, away from the prying eyes of the few remaining guests and my own horrified family. The office was small and smelled of old books and floor polish. It was cluttered with papers and religious artifacts, a tiny, quiet sanctuary from the hurricane outside. Father Michael closed the door behind us, leaving the three of us, me, Maya, and Mark in a suffocating silence. "I'll wait outside," Mark said, giving my shoulder a final supportive squeeze before slipping out and shutting the door, leaving me alone with her. Maya wouldn't look at me. She stood by a dusty bookshelf, her arms wrapped around her stomach as if to shield the baby from my toxicity. The black dress she wore seemed to swallow the dim light in the room. "So," I began, the word feeling stupid and inadequate. "You're pregnant, and it's mine." It wasn't a question. We both knew the answer. The timing was a lock. She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a fresh wave of tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Leo, I tried to tell you, I really did. I called, I texted, I even sent a registered letter to your parents' house. I didn't want this. I never wanted to do it like this." "A letter?" The confusion cut through my numbness. My mom never said anything about a letter. She wouldn't. Maya said with a bitter little shake of her head. She told me to my face that you were happy, that you were moving on, and that if I was smart, I would deal with my problem quietly and not ruin your life. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My own mother. I pictured the scene. My sweet, church-going mother telling my pregnant ex-girlfriend to effectively disappear. The betrayal was so profound it made me physically dizzy. It recontextualized everything. Her frantic happiness about the wedding, her pushing for us to get married so quickly. It wasn't just joy for her son, it was a desperate attempt to bury a secret. My secret. Oh God, I breathed, slumping into the priest's worn leather chair. I ran my hands through my hair, the gel from the morning feeling sticky and fake. Maya, I am so sorry. I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had known... What? She snapped, a flash of the old, fiery Maya breaking through her fear. What would you have done, Leo? Would you have called off the wedding? Or would you have just tried to buy my silence? I didn't have an answer. I honestly didn't know. I loved Chloe with every fiber of my being. But a child changed everything. I don't know, I admitted, the truth a miserable weight on my tongue. But you wouldn't have had to do this. She seemed to deflate, the anger draining away, leaving her looking exhausted and fragile. I know, she said softly. This wasn't about hurting her. I saw her face, Leo. I'll never forget it. This was my last resort. I'm scared. I'll help, I said instantly, the words coming out before I'd even thought them through. With money, anything you need, I'll be there. I'll do the right thing. That's the problem, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She took a shaky breath, finally stepping away from the bookshelf and moving closer to the desk I was sitting at. It's not just about money. It's not about you doing the right thing. It's more complicated than that. What's more complicated than having a baby, Maya? I asked, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. What else could she possibly have to tell me? She wrung her hands, her gaze dropping to the floor. She looked like she was about to be physically ill. When I found out I was pregnant, she began, her voice trembling, I was 6 weeks along. I went to the doctor, to confirm it. They did an ultrasound and they ran some other tests. Standard procedure. Okay, I prompted, my heart starting to pound again. Where was this going? She looked up at me, her eyes wide and swimming with terror. Leo, the baby, there's a problem, a genetic condition. It's serious. The doctors said it's inherited, and it's a very high probability that one of the parents is a carrier. I stared at her, my mind struggling to keep up. A genetic condition? What was she talking about? Okay, so we get tested. We find out who the carrier is. We deal with it. You don't understand, she choked out, a sob catching in her throat. They already tested me. I'm not the carrier. The blood drained from my face. I felt the room tilt, the dusty books on the shelves seeming to warp and bend. If she wasn't the carrier, then that meant... But that's not the worst part, Maya whispered, her face ashen. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the desk, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that terrified me. The condition, it's extremely rare, but it's much more common in people who have a family history of it. Leo, they asked me about my family, and I told them everything I knew. And then they asked about your family. She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, as if the next words were physically painful to say. The doctor told me that this specific genetic marker is almost exclusively passed down when the parents are related. The priest's office, once a quiet sanctuary, suddenly felt like a shrinking, airless box. The words Maya spoke didn't compute. They were nonsense, a string of impossible syllables. Related, I repeated, my voice a hollow echo of itself. What are you talking about? That's insane. We're not related. I know it sounds crazy, she said, her hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles were white. But the genetic counselor was very specific. He asked if there was any possibility, however remote, that we could share a common grandparent, or even great-grandparent. He said it would explain the test results perfectly. My mind reeled. It was preposterous. I knew my family. My dad was an only child. My mom had one sister, my Aunt Carol. I'd known Maya's family, too. Her parents were high school sweethearts from our town. Her grandparents lived a few states away. There was no connection. It was a mistake. The doctors had to be wrong. They're wrong, I said flatly, shaking my head. It's a mistake, Maya, a 1 in a million statistical anomaly. There's no way. That's what I thought, she cried, her voice cracking. That's what I told them. But they kept pushing, asking about family secrets, about anyone who might not be who they seem. And then I remembered something. She hesitated, her eyes filled with a pained uncertainty. Your dad. You always said he was adopted, right? The question hung in the air, a simple fact that suddenly felt heavy with ominous significance. Yeah, I said slowly. He was adopted as a baby. His birth parents were teenagers who couldn't keep him. What does that have to do with anything? My mom's dad, Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper. My grandpa. He had a child when he was in high school, a boy. He and the girl gave him up for adoption. They were too young. Their parents forced them to do it. It was the big family secret. My mom only told me a few years ago. She said it broke her dad's heart, that he spent years trying to find him, but the records were sealed. A cold dread, so absolute and so profound it felt like death itself, began to creep up my spine. My body went rigid. The pieces, insane and impossible as they were, started to click into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid closing. The shared hometown, the timeline, my dad's adoption, her grandfather's lost son. No, I breathed, the word a plea. No, it can't be. His name is Frank, Maya whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. My grandpa's name is Frank Miller. Frank. The name of my father's biological father gleaned from the tattered original birth certificate he'd finally unsealed when he turned 50. Frank Miller. A man we knew only as a name on a piece of paper, a ghost from a past that wasn't ours, until this exact moment. My father and her mother were half-siblings, which meant that Maya and we were first cousins. The realization didn't just shock me, it felt like it fundamentally rewired my entire existence. My love for Chloe, the wedding, the public humiliation, all of it was suddenly eclipsed by a horror so primal it defied description. The baby Maya was carrying wasn't just the product of my infidelity, it was the product of incest. The door to the rectory office opened. My dad stood there, his face a mask of concern. Leo, is everything all right? Your mother is worried sick. He looked from my ashen face to Maya's tear-streaked one, and his brow furrowed. What's going on? I couldn't speak. I just stared at the man who had raised me, the man I loved and respected, and saw him through a horrifying new lens. I saw the ghost of his father, Frank Miller, and in doing so, I saw Maya's grandfather. It was Maya who finally broke the silence. Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice trembling but clear. My grandfather's name is Frank Miller. Does that name mean anything to you? I watched my father's face. The confusion slowly melted away, replaced by a dawning comprehension so shocking that all the color drained from his skin. He stumbled back a step, his hand going to the door frame for support. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered between me and Maya. He did the math. He saw the truth. And in that moment, I saw my own horror mirrored in the eyes of my father. The secret he had carried his whole life had just collided with the secret his father had carried, and the explosion had destroyed us all. The weeks that followed were a blur of numb conversations and soul-crushing revelations. My mother's confession about the letter was followed by my father's tearful phone call to a man in another state, the biological father he'd never met, who turned out to be Maya's grandfather. The truth, once unleashed, was a relentless, devastating flood. Chloe, true to her word, never spoke to me again. I heard through mutual friends that she and her family moved out of state a month later, a decision I couldn't blame them for. I was a pariah in our town, the star of a scandal so grotesque it would be whispered about for years. I had lost her forever, and I knew I deserved it. My focus shifted entirely to Maya and the baby. We weren't a couple. The revelation had made any semblance of a romantic connection between us feel toxic and impossible. We became something else, partners in a strange, tragic new reality. We were family, bound by a terrible secret and the innocent life it had created. We attended genetic counseling sessions and countless doctor's appointments together. The baby, a little boy, was diagnosed with a rare recessive disorder, just as the doctors had predicted. It would mean a lifetime of challenges, of specialized care and uncertainty. When our son, Daniel, was born in late October, I was there. Holding him for the first time was the most terrifying and beautiful moment of my life. He was so small, so fragile. Looking at his tiny face, I felt the last vestiges of my youthful selfishness burn away, replaced by a fierce, protective love that was overwhelming. He was my son, my responsibility, my penance and my redemption all rolled into one. My parents, shattered by their own roles in the catastrophe, eventually stepped up. My mom, consumed with guilt, became a doting, hands-on grandmother. My dad and Maya's grandfather, two strangers connected by a 50-year-old secret, began to build a tentative, complicated relationship, trying to piece together a family that had been broken before it ever began. It's been years now. I'm no longer the 21-year-old king who stood at that altar. Life stripped that boy of his crown and his illusions. I'm a single father, co-parenting with my cousin. It's not the life I ever imagined, but it's my life. Daniel is the center of my universe. He's a happy, resilient kid who has taught me more about love, sacrifice, and forgiveness than I ever thought possible. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that day in the church. I think about the scent of lilies and the look on Chloe's face. The shame is still there, a permanent scar on my soul. I destroyed so much that day, but in the wreckage, something new was born. Not just my son, but a new version of me. A man who understands the devastating weight of secrets and the profound healing power of facing the truth, no matter how ugly it is. I lost the perfect life I thought I wanted, but I found a purpose I never knew I needed.